The silence in a courtroom is a weapon. It can be used to intimidate, to reflect, or to deliver a verdict that shatters a life. For Isabella Rossi, perched in the front row, like a pampered falcon in designer silks, that silence was a stage for her triumph. She watched the woman on the stand, the poor wife, Amelia Hayes, and a smirk danced on her perfectly glossed lips. A quiet laugh meant only for her lover echoed just a little too loudly. But in the theatre of justice, the final act belongs to the judge. And his next words were about to bring down the curtain on her smug little world, proving that the most dangerous thing you can ever do is underestimate the person you've wronged. The smell of their first apartment had been a strange mix of old paper from Amelia's textbooks and the lingering scent of burnt coffee from Richard's late-night coding sessions. It was the smell of ambition, of shared dreams brewed in a tiny, cramped kitchen in a walk-up that groaned with every step. Amelia Hayes remembered that smell with a fondness that now felt like a physical ache in her chest. She had loved that smell. She had loved the man who created it. That man was now a stranger who sat across from her in a cavernous, mahogany-lined office, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he was carved from granite and ambition. Richard Hayes, CEO of Innovate Dynamics, was no longer the boy who'd celebrate a successful line of code by splitting a single slice of cheesecake with her. This Richard wore a $10,000 suit, and his eyes, once warm and full of shared futures, were now as cold and impenetrable as the glass walls of his downtown skyscraper. The fracture had begun, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A text message glimpsed over his shoulder. "Can't wait to have you all to myself tonight. Wear the blue tie I bought you." Amelia's heart had stuttered. For Isabella. Isabella Rossi, the impossibly chic real estate agent who had sold them their sterile, white-on-white mansion a year ago, a house Amelia had never managed to make feel like a home. Then came the other whispers, the late board meetings, the faint, unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the way he'd started looking through her, his gaze fixed on a horizon she was no longer a part of. He had become a master of plausible deniability, each excuse a carefully laid brick in the wall he was building between them. Amelia was not a fool, but she was a romantic. She was a middle school history teacher, a woman who believed in foundations, in the slow, steady work of building something that lasts. Their marriage, she thought, was a fortress built over 15 years. It had been built with her meager teacher's salary when he was just a grad student with a revolutionary idea and no funding. It was fortified by the nights she'd spent proofreading his business proposals, making ramen noodles so they could afford server space, and massaging the tension from his shoulders when his code wouldn't compile. She was the bedrock, the unseen foundation upon which he had built his empire. The day the wall came crashing down, it was with a brutal, almost theatrical cruelty. He'd sat her down in their cavernous living room, the white leather sofa cold against her skin, and delivered the news with the detached efficiency of a quarterly earnings report. "Amelia, this isn't working anymore," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. "We've grown apart. I've met someone." He didn't have to say who. Isabella Rossi's perfectly curated Instagram feed had already told the story. Pictures of her in exotic locations with captions like, "Feeling blessed," featuring the unmistakable cuff of Richard's custom-made shirt, or the glint of his watch in the corner of the frame. The whole world knew before Amelia was allowed to. "It's Isabella," Amelia had stated, her voice a hollow echo in the vast room. Richard had the gall to look relieved. "Yes, it's best to be honest. I want a divorce." The word hung in the air, sharp and ugly. He then outlined the terms not as a husband, speaking to his wife of 15 years, but as a CEO presenting a severance package. He would give her the old house, their modest first home, which was now a rental property, and a lump sum that to him was probably a rounding error, but was meant to sound generous to a school teacher. He made it clear that Innovate Dynamics, his billion-dollar tech firm, was entirely his. I built it after we, drifted. He'd said the lie tasting like ash in Amelia's mouth. Your contributions were supportive, and I appreciate that. But they weren't financial or foundational. Amelia felt a cold fury rise within her, a feeling so foreign it was dizzying. Supportive, she had been the co-architect of his dream. But as she looked at the man before her, she knew arguing was pointless. The Richard she had loved was gone, replaced by this polished, ruthless automaton. She hired a lawyer, a young, earnest man named Daniel Chen, who seemed out of his depth against Richard's legal titan, Franklin Sterling. The initial mediation was a humiliation. Sterling spoke of Amelia as if she were a gold-digging opportunist, a decorative piece of furniture from Richard's early, less successful life. Mrs. Hayes was a teacher. Sterling had boomed his voice, dripping with condescension. A noble profession, to be sure. But let's be clear, she did not write a single line of code. She did not attend a single venture capital meeting. She did not build Innovate Dynamics. Her husband did, and he is willing to be more than generous in acknowledging her years as a homemaker. Richard just sat there, nodding his face, a mask of solemn agreement, and in the corner of the room, tapping away on her phone, was Isabella, who had insisted on being there for moral support. She was dressed in a pristine white pantsuit, a stark contrast to Amelia's simple grey dress. Every few minutes, she would look up, catch Amelia's eye, and offer a small, pitying smile. It was the smile of a victor. That was the moment Amelia Hayes knew she wouldn't just lie down and accept the scraps from the table she had helped build. This wasn't just about money. This was about her life, her history, her truth. As she walked out of that office, the condescending smiles of Richard and Isabella burning into her back, she made a silent vow. They thought she was just a poor, simple wife. They were about to learn how much history a simple history teacher can remember. Daniel Chen's office was the polar opposite of Franklin Sterling's. It was a small, cluttered space above a bustling Vietnamese restaurant, smelling faintly of pho and old books. Stacks of legal texts threatened to avalanche onto the floor, and the coffee he served was strong and bitter. Yet there was a warmth and sincerity in Daniel that Amelia hadn't felt in months. "They're painting you as a bystander to your own life, Amelia," Daniel said, pushing a stack of files aside to make eye contact. He was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through the legal jargon and into the heart of the matter. "Our job is to prove you were a co-founder in everything but name." "But how?" Amelia's voice was frail. "I don't have documents. I didn't sign anything. It was all built on trust, on promises made over takeout boxes at 2 a.m. "Trust and promises are hard to quantify in court," Daniel admitted, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Sterling is going to bury us in paperwork about corporate structures, shareholder agreements, and funding rounds, all of which occurred after 2015, the year he'll claim Richard's real success began conveniently after you two grew apart." Richard's narrative was simple and brutal. Innovate Dynamics was born from a genius idea he had in 2016, long after their marriage was, in his words, a functional roommate situation. He claimed the foundational technology, the very soul of the company, was something he developed alone. "He's lying," Amelia said, her fists clenching in her lap. "Innovate Dynamics is just a new name for an old project. It's the evolution of something we started together in college." Daniel's eyes lit up. "Tell me everything, from the very beginning." And so Amelia began to excavate her own history. She spoke of their days at Stanford, where she was a history major, with a minor in computational linguistics, and he was a brilliant, chaotic computer science student. He had the vision, she had the structure, he saw the end result. She mapped the path to get there. He was working on a predictive algorithm. She explained the memories flooding back with a painful clarity. He wanted it to analyze user behavior online to predict market trends, but he was stuck. His code was a mess and his logic had holes. I helped. My linguistics background helped me see patterns in the data that he missed. I helped him structure the logic, organize the database queries. We called it Serafina. Serafina, Daniel asked, scribbling furiously on a legal pad. A sad smile touched Amelia's lips. It was my grandmother's name. She always said she could predict when it would rain just by the feeling in the air. Richard thought it was fitting. For weeks, Amelia and Daniel worked tirelessly. They were David against a corporate Goliath. Richard's legal team filed motion after motion, burying them in discovery requests and procedural roadblocks designed to drain Amelia's limited resources. The first settlement offer was insulting. The second was even more so, accompanied by a letter from Sterling, subtly threatening to drag her personal life through the mud if she didn't accept. Meanwhile, Isabella Rossi was playing the role of the devoted fiancée with relish. Her social media became a highlight reel of her perfect life with Richard. There they were on a yacht in Monaco, at a charity gala in New York, touring vineyards in Napa. One post in particular felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. It was a picture of her and Richard in his gleaming office at Innovate Dynamics. The caption read, "So proud of my brilliant man who built this incredible empire all by himself. A true visionary. Self-made, gorgeous, Innovate Dynamics. Can't-to power couple." The comments were a chorus of fawning praise. Amelia read them until her vision blurred with tears. The world saw her as a relic, a footnote in the grand story of Richard Hayes. Desperate, Amelia spent a weekend at the old house, the one Richard had so magnanimously gifted her. It was now dusty and filled with the ghosts of a happier time. She went to the attic, a place she hadn't visited in years, searching for anything that could help her case. She coughed in the thick, stale air, pulling open old boxes labeled college mementos and early married life. She found faded photos of her and a younger, smiling Richard. She found old love letters full of promises of a shared future. They were painful to read, but legally useless. She was about to give up sinking onto an old trunk in despair when her hand brushed against something hard and metallic under a pile of old blankets. It was a box. A heavy-duty fire-resistant lockbox. She didn't recognize it at first. Then her breath caught in her throat. It was the box where Richard used to keep his most important backups, external hard drives, disks of source code. Things he was terrified of losing in a fire or a system crash. He hadn't used it in a decade. He must have completely forgotten about it. It was locked. A combination lock. Her mind raced, sifting through a decade and a half of shared numbers. Anniversaries, birthdays. Nothing worked. Her fingers were grimy, her hope fading. Then she remembered something else. A silly number from a joke in a movie they both loved. 10451. She tried it. The lock clicked open. Inside, nestled amongst old cables and software manuals, were 3 external hard drives. They were ancient by tech standards with thick casings and clunky USB-A connectors. On one, a faded sticky note was still attached. In her own neat handwriting, it read, Serafina Project. Final Backup. 2008. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed the box and practically flew out of the attic. Dust be damned. This could be nothing. The drives could be corrupted, unreadable, or they could be everything. They could be the echo of the truth preserved in silicon and waiting to be heard. The atmosphere in Daniel Chen's office the next morning was electric. A tech-savvy paralegal named Maya had been called in, and she was meticulously working on the old hard drives, her face illuminated by the glow of her multiple monitors. The clacking of her keyboard was the only sound, a staccato rhythm against the tense silence. "These file systems are ancient," Maya muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's like an archaeological dig." But I'm in. Amelia and Daniel leaned in, watching as directories and file names unseen for over a decade flickered to life on the screen. There were folders filled with research papers, datasets, and countless versions of code. It was a digital time capsule of their shared past. Look for a directory named Serafina. Amelia urged, her voice barely a whisper. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, she stopped. Got it. Serafina, DAB v3 final. Inside were dozens of files. Code documentation, logical flowcharts. Maya opened a file named readme.txt. The first line of text appeared on the screen, and Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. Project Serafina authors: Richard Hayes, Amelia Davenport. Hayes. Date May 12, 2008. Description: a novel predictive algorithm utilizing linguistic pattern analysis to forecast user-driven market trends. Amelia's maiden name. Davenport. She had written this file herself. Her hands flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. It was real. It wasn't just a memory or a story she'd told herself. It was there in black and white. "This is good, Amelia. This is very good," Daniel said, his voice tight with excitement. This directly contradicts his entire narrative that Innovate Dynamics was a post-2015 creation. "There's more," Maya said, her eyes wide. She clicked open a file containing the core algorithm's source code. "I'm not a high-level programmer, but look at the comments in the code itself." She scrolled through lines of complex code. Every few paragraphs there were notes, annotations, explaining the logic. Crash into ADH suggestion. Restructure query to prioritize semantic proximity over keyword density. Logic seems more robust. As per Amelia's flowchart, implementing the Bayesian filter here. Final check by ADH on the core logic module. Looks solid. Ready for final backup. Initialed ADH, Amelia Davenport Hayes. It was her digital fingerprint woven into the very DNA of the code. She had forgotten she'd even done it, this habit of initialing her contributions when they were collaborating. But the true bombshell was yet to come. Deep within another folder labeled Business Projections, they found a scanned document. It was a preliminary patent application, a provisional patent meant to establish an early filing date for an invention. It described the Serafina algorithm in dense technical detail, and at the bottom, listed under inventors, were two names, Richard T. Hayes and Amelia L. Davenport. They had filled it out together one night, fueled by cheap pizza and dreams of changing the world. They'd never had the money to file the full patent, and the provisional application had expired a year later, but the document itself was a nuclear warhead aimed directly at the heart of Richard's case. It was time-stamped, legally formatted proof that he had always considered her a co-inventor. He built his entire billion-dollar company on this. Daniel said, his voice a low, awestruck whisper as he stared at the screen. He just changed the name, polished the code, and pretended the past 15 years never happened. The discovery galvanized them. Daniel immediately hired a digital forensics expert, Dr. Alastair Finch, a man with a string of impressive credentials to analyze the hard drive and the core code of Innovate Dynamics' current flagship product. The strategy shifted. This was no longer a simple divorce case about marital assets. It had become a fight over intellectual property, over the very foundation of Richard's empire. When Daniel's team filed the new evidence with the court, Franklin Sterling's office responded with dismissive fury. They called the evidence a desperate fabrication, the ramblings of a scorned woman attempting to rewrite history. They claimed the hard drive was likely tampered with, and that the Serafina project was a failed college experiment that bore no resemblance to the sophisticated technology of Innovate Dynamics. Richard for the first time looked rattled. He called Amelia, his voice a low growl over the phone. "What do you think you're doing, Amelia? Digging up some old college project? This is pathetic. You're going to embarrass yourself." "It's the truth, Richard," Amelia said, her voice steady, fortified by the evidence sitting on Daniel's desk. "The truth. The truth is, you were a history teacher while I was building a global company. You have no idea what it took. You have no right to any of it," he yelled. "Accept the offer. It's the last one you'll get. If you proceed with this, I will leave you with nothing. I'll bury you in legal fees until you're destitute." The threat hung in the air, but it no longer held the same power. Before she was fighting a memory. Now she was fighting with proof. "I'll see you in court, Richard," she said, and hung up the phone. The stage was set for a confrontation, not just of two people, but of two entirely different versions of the past. One was a carefully constructed fiction of a lone genius. The other was the messy, forgotten, but irrefutable truth resurrected from a ghost in an old machine. The day of the hearing arrived cloaked in a chilly September mist. The courthouse was an imposing granite structure, its columns like silent judging sentinels. Amelia felt small against its grandeur, her simple navy blue suit a stark contrast to the power suits and designer bags that swept past her into the building. Daniel gave her a reassuring nod, his own expression a mask of calm focus. Inside the courtroom was a theater of hushed tension. Wood-paneled walls seemed to absorb all sound, and the air was thick with the weight of consequence. Richard and his lawyer, Franklin Sterling, were already seated at their table. Richard looked pale and tense, his usual charismatic confidence replaced by a rigid jawline. But it was Isabella Rossi who truly captured the room's attention. She wasn't just present. She was performing. Dressed in a vibrant fuchsia dress that stood out like a tropical flower in a monastery, she sat in the front row directly behind Richard. Her posture was perfect, her expression a carefully curated blend of concern for her fiancé and utter disdain for the proceedings. She was a living, breathing advertisement for the life Richard had built, a life her presence screamed that Amelia had no part in. As Amelia took her seat, she could feel Isabella's eyes on her. It was a heavy, judgmental gaze. Amelia chanced to look and saw Isabella lean over to whisper something in Richard's ear, a perfectly manicured hand resting on his shoulder. Richard managed a weak smile. Then Isabella looked back at Amelia, and her lips curled into a smirk of pure, unadulterated condescension. It was a look that said, "You've already lost. Look at him. Look at me. This is his life now." The hearing began. Franklin Sterling was first, his voice booming through the silent courtroom. He was a master orator, weaving a tale of Richard Hayes as a solitary visionary, a man who had toiled for years to bring his revolutionary technology to the world. "Mr. Hayes's success is a testament to the American dream," Sterling declared, gesturing dramatically towards Richard. And now his ex-wife, years after their separation, became an emotional reality, seeks to attach herself to that success. She brings forth a dusty old hard drive, a relic from a college project, a digital ghost story, in a desperate attempt to claim a prize she didn't earn. He belittled the Serafina project, calling it academic juvenilia. He painted Amelia as a woman who had been content with her quiet life as a teacher, only showing interest in her husband's work when the stock options began to vest. When it was Amelia's turn on the stand, Sterling's cross-examination was brutal. "Mrs. Hayes, you are a history teacher. Is that correct?" "Yes." "You have no formal degree in computer science." "No, but I have a minor in—" A simple yes or no will suffice, Mrs. Hayes. Sterling cut her off. "You never worked at Innovate Dynamics, did you?" "No." "You never invested any of your own money into the company." "I invested everything I had in the years before the company when we had nothing." Again, Mrs. Hayes, a simple yes or no. Did you or did you not write a check from your own bank account as an initial investment in Innovate Dynamics as it is legally incorporated today? "No." Amelia said, her voice small. Sterling paced before the witness stand like a shark circling its prey. "So to be clear for the court, you have no formal training, you were never an employee, and you were not an investor. Your claim to this billion-dollar enterprise rests entirely on the assertion that you provided moral support and suggestions on a college project 15 years ago." He let the question hang in the air heavy with ridicule. The implication was clear. She was delusional, greedy. Amelia could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, could feel their judgment. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. And then she heard it. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a quiet, sharp exhalation of air from the front row. A giggle quickly suppressed. Amelia's eyes darted towards the sound. Isabella Rossi had her hand over her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking with silent laughter. She caught Amelia's gaze, and for a split second, the mask of polite concern dropped, revealing raw, triumphant mockery. Her eyes sparkled with it. It was the most dismissive, cruelest sound Amelia had ever heard. It was the sound of someone who believed they had so completely and utterly won that they could afford to laugh at the vanquished. It was a laugh that said Amelia was pathetic, her claims laughable, her entire life's contribution a joke. In that moment, something inside Amelia shifted. The humiliation, the fear, the sadness, it all burned away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The laughter echoed in the silent courtroom, audible to the judge, to the lawyers, to everyone. A bailiff shot Isabella a warning look, and she quickly composed herself into a picture of feigned innocence. But the damage was done. The sound had solidified everything. This wasn't just a legal dispute anymore. It was a battle for her dignity. When Daniel Chen began his questioning, Amelia's voice was different. It was no longer small or hesitant. It was clear and steady. She calmly detailed the long nights, the specific, logical problems she had solved, the way her linguistics background was essential to the algorithm's pattern-matching capabilities. She spoke not as a victim, but as a creator, defending her work. Daniel then called his expert witness, Dr. Alistair Finch, a prim, meticulous man. Dr. Finch presented his findings with methodical precision. He had analyzed the code from the Serafina hard drive and compared it to the core code of Innovate Dynamics' current product. "It is my professional opinion," Dr. Finch stated, looking directly at the judge, "that the Innovate Dynamics Apex algorithm is not merely based on the Serafina code. It is the Serafina code. It has been refactored, optimized, and expanded upon, of course, but the foundational architecture, the core logical structures, the 7-layer pattern analysis protocol, which is its unique selling point, is functionally identical. One is the direct, undeniable ancestor of the other. Franklin Sterling's objections were loud, but Dr. Finch's credentials and his detailed point-by-point comparison were unshakable. He presented data flow charts that showed how the academic juvenilia was in fact the blueprint for a billion-dollar product. The courtroom was silent. Richard Hayes was ashen-faced. Isabella Rossi's smug smile had vanished, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She fidgeted with the strap of her outrageously expensive handbag. The laugh, once a signal of her victory, now seemed like a foolish, premature celebration. The judge, a man named Marcus Thorne, with a reputation for being shrewd and unreadable, had listened to everything with an impassive expression. But as Dr. Finch concluded his testimony, Judge Thorne's eyes drifted to the front row, lingering for a moment on Isabella. And then he looked at Amelia, a long, searching look. The air grew heavy. The final act was about to begin. Judge Marcus Thorne was a man who appreciated the subtleties of the courtroom. He had presided over cases for 20 years, and he'd learned that the truth often revealed itself not in the grand declarations, but in the small, unguarded moments, a flicker of fear in a witness's eye, an overly rehearsed answer, or a quiet, condescending laugh from the gallery. Isabella Rossi's laugh had not escaped his notice. It was a sound of profound arrogance, and Judge Thorne had little patience for arrogance. He adjusted the spectacles on his nose and looked down from his bench, his gaze sweeping over the four central figures in this drama. Richard Hayes, who looked like his carefully constructed world, was crumbling. Franklin Sterling, who was shuffling papers with a blustering confidence that was beginning to look like desperation. Amelia Hayes, who sat with a quiet, newfound poise, and Isabella Rossi, whose fuchsia dress suddenly seemed garish and out of place, a gaudy splash of color in a somber tableau of consequence. Mr. Sterling, the judge began his voice, calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority that silenced all whispers. Your argument rests on the premise that the work done by Mr. Hayes and the plaintiff during their university years was insignificant, a mere intellectual footnote to the later success of Innovate Dynamics. Is that a fair summary? Yes, Your Honor. It was a student project, nothing more, Sterling affirmed, puffing out his chest. And Mr. Hayes, the judge said, turning his attention to Richard, who visibly stiffened. You testified under oath that the foundational concepts for Innovate Dynamics were conceived by you and you alone in the year 2016. That's correct, Your Honor, Richard said, his voice strained. Judge Thorne leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. Then perhaps you can explain this. He nodded to his clerk, who passed a document down to the bailiff. The bailiff in turn placed it on the projector so the entire courtroom could see. It was the provisional patent application from the hard drive, the one bearing two names under the heading Inventors. This document, the judge said, his voice dropping, is a provisional patent application for an algorithm described as a novel predictive algorithm utilizing linguistic pattern analysis. It is dated June of 2008. It lists two inventors, Richard T. Hayes and Amelia L. Davenport. Mr. Hayes, is that your signature? The camera zoomed in on the signature line. Richard stared at it, his face losing all its color. It was like watching a statue turn to dust. It was a long time ago. This was just brainstorming. Brainstorming that you felt was significant enough to legally protect with a patent application. Judge Thorne countered, his voice laced with ice. An application that describes in stunning detail the very technology Dr. Finch just testified is the heart of your company's flagship product. Sterling jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This document was never filed as a full patent. It expired. It's legally irrelevant. Legally irrelevant as to patent ownership. Perhaps. the judge conceded with a slight nod. But as to the matter of origin of invention and of the defendant's credibility here today, under oath I find it to be extraordinarily relevant. Please sit down, Mr. Sterling. Sterling sat, his face thunderous. The unravelling was happening fast, and it was brutal. Judge Thorne then turned his attention to Daniel Chen. Mr. Chen, your expert witness testified that the Serafina code is the direct ancestor of the Apex algorithm. Does your team have any further evidence to substantiate the plaintiff's contribution to this ancestral code? We do, Your Honor, Daniel said, rising. He gestured to Maya, who brought a laptop to the witness stand. We have the code itself, filled with annotations from my client. And we have something else. On the screen, an old email chain appeared. It was from Richard's university email account to Amelia's, dated May 2008. The subject line read, "Serafina is alive." The body of the email was a frantic, joyous block of text from Richard. "Millie, you did it. Your logic for the semantic filtering worked. I was stuck for a month on that. It's not just working, it's elegant. It's beautiful. I ran the tests 3 times. It's predicting the sample datasets with 98% accuracy. You're a genius. We are going to be billionaires. I'm buying the pizza. Don't you dare start the next chapter of that history book without me. This is ours." Rich, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. It was the smoking gun, not just of her contribution, but of his own acknowledgement of it. It was a digital ghost rising from the grave to speak the truth. This is ours. Amelia closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was a tear of vindication. Richard Hayes sank into his chair, looking utterly defeated. He didn't even look at his lawyer. He looked at Isabella. Her face was a mask of disbelief and horror. The beautiful self-made empire she had attached herself to was revealed to be built on a lie she had gleefully helped perpetuate. The foundation was cracking, and her gilded cage was about to come crashing down around her. Judge Thorne removed his glasses and polished them slowly, his silence more damning than any outburst. He surveyed the scene, the shattered lies, the exposed deceit. His gaze finally settled back on Richard. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice now devoid of all warmth. "It seems you have a very convenient memory. You remember your own brilliance, but you forget the partner who made that brilliance functional. You remember your success, but you forget the foundation it was built on. And most egregiously, you stood in this court under oath and attempted to erase a 15-year partnership from history." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The court finds the defendant's testimony to be non-credible. Utterly." He then looked at Amelia, his expression softening for the first time. "Mrs. Hayes, your contributions have been noted." The words were simple, but for Amelia, they were everything. It wasn't about the money. It was about that one simple acknowledgement. The truth finally spoken aloud in a place of power. The smile was long gone from Isabella Rossi's face. It had been replaced by a frozen, waxen look of panic. The show was over. The judgment was coming. Judge Thorne put his glasses back on. The small, deliberate action seemed to signal a shift from fact-finding to judgment. A profound stillness fell over the courtroom. Richard Hayes stared blankly at his hands. Franklin Sterling was frantically whispering to him, but Richard seemed not to hear. All his focus was on the judge. But Judge Thorne didn't look at Richard first. His gaze swept past him, past the lawyers, and landed with an unnerving precision on the front row. He looked directly at Isabella Rossi. "Before I address the division of assets," Judge Thorne began, his voice ringing with a cold, clear authority that made Isabella flinch as if struck, I would like to make an observation about decorum. A court of law is a place where lives are altered, where truths are sought, and where futures are decided. It is not a theatre for the amusement of spectators." Isabella's face, already pale, turned a shade of chalky white. Her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looked garish, a bloody slash in a sea of white. "Your behaviour today, madam," the judge continued, his eyes boring into her, specifically your audible laughter at Mrs. Hayes's expense during her testimony, was not only an act of profound disrespect to the plaintiff, but an insult to this court. It spoke of a shocking lack of empathy and a grotesque sense of entitlement. It was the laugh of someone who believed the outcome was already purchased, that justice was a commodity. Let me be unequivocally clear, it is not. Every word was a hammer blow. Isabella shrank in her seat, the fuchsia of her dress seeming to wilt under the judge's glare. The entire courtroom was watching her, not as the glamorous victor, but as a shamed interloper. The smirk she had worn so proudly was now a ghost, a memory of a hubris that had just met its reckoning. Having delivered his searing admonishment, Judge Thorne finally turned his attention to the legal matter at hand. His gaze shifted to Richard. "Mr. Hayes, your legal team has argued for a standard division of marital assets predicated on the claim that your company Innovate Dynamics was your sole creation, conceived and built long after your marriage had effectively ended. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented today, the hard drive, the source code annotations, the defendant's own emails, and the provisional patent application, this court rejects that claim in its entirety." He paused, letting the finality of that statement sink in. This is not a simple case of a supportive spouse. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Amelia Hayes was not merely a cheerleader for your success. She was an integral and foundational contributor to the core intellectual property that is the sole basis of Innovate Dynamics' value. Her intellectual labor was not a college project. It was the seed from which your entire forest grew. Franklin Sterling started to rise, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of his hand. "Therefore," Judge Thorne announced, his voice resonating with the full power of the bench, "the court will not be treating Innovate Dynamics as a simple marital asset to be divided." A confused murmur rippled through the room. What did that mean? Richard looked up, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. Maybe it was good for him. The judge's next words erased that hope forever. Instead, the court officially recognizes Amelia Hayes as a de facto co-founder of the enterprise. Her contributions were not matrimonial support, they were foundational equity. The court, therefore, is not awarding Mrs. Hayes a percentage of marital property. It is awarding her a direct, non-dilutable ownership stake in Innovate Dynamics itself. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Richard Hayes's jaw dropped. Sterling looked apoplectic. "And what of the percentage?" Sterling managed to stammer out. "Your Honor, precedent suggests—" "Precedent is for cases built on truth, Mr. Sterling, not on a mountain of deliberate and calculated deceit." Judge Thorne cut him off, his voice like thunder. Given the evidence of co-invention on the original patent, the clear partnership demonstrated in the emails, and Mr. Hayes's fraudulent attempts to erase Mrs. Hayes's role entirely, the court deems a standard 50-50 split of the marital share to be insufficient. He took a breath, and then he delivered the final, devastating blow. The court hereby awards Amelia Hayes 40% of the total shares of Innovate Dynamics, directly, effective immediately, 40%, not of the marital portion, 40% of the entire billion-dollar company. A collective audible gasp filled the courtroom. It was a number so staggering, so far beyond what anyone had anticipated, that it seemed to bend reality. It was a transfer of power so immense and so sudden it was difficult to comprehend. Amelia herself looked stunned, her hand gripping Daniel's arm. But it was Isabella's reaction that was the most profound. Her face, which had been a frozen mask of panic, now seemed to crumble. The smile she had worn so smugly just an hour before was not just gone. It was shattered into a million pieces. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from the judge to Richard. She was looking at the man she thought was her golden ticket, her self-made billionaire. But he wasn't self-made, and he was no longer a sole billionaire. He was a fraud, and his fortune had just been carved in half and handed to the woman she had mocked. The man she had attached herself to was no longer the all-powerful Titan. He was just a man, exposed and diminished. The luxury life, the yachts, the Fjärwast power couple Instagram posts it, was all predicated on a lie, and that lie had just cost him close to $500 million. Her future, which had seemed so dazzlingly bright, was now irrevocably tarnished. Her smile was frozen, a grotesque rictus of shock and disbelief. The laugh that had echoed with such confidence was now a silent scream trapped behind her perfectly painted lips. In the theatre of justice, the judge had delivered the final line, and it had brought the entire production of her life crashing down around her. The final rap of Judge Thorne's gavel didn't so much end the silence as shatter it into a million sharp-edged pieces. For a suspended moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. The double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open as reporters who had been waiting like wolves in the hall surged forward. Camera flashes began to strobe, turning the somber room into a frantic, dazzling spectacle. Shouted questions overlapped into an indecipherable roar. "Mr. Hayes, any comment, Mrs. Hayes? How does it feel? 40%, is that accurate?" Amelia felt Daniel Chen's hand on her arm, a steadying presence in the maelstrom. She was in a state of shock, the judge's words echoing in her mind, but not yet fully registering. 40%. It was a number too vast to comprehend a mathematical concept rather than a reality. Franklin Sterling, his face a mask of purple fury, created a human shield around Richard, barking, "No comment," as he bulldozed his client towards a private side exit. Richard moved like a man in a trance, his eyes vacant, seeing nothing. He looked utterly broken, a king suddenly stripped of his crown, his castle, and the very story of his reign. He didn't spare a single glance for Amelia or for the woman he had left her for. Isabella Rossi was forgotten in the initial scrum. She remained rooted to her seat in the front row, a perfect porcelain doll suddenly cracked. The fuchsia of her dress, once a statement of vibrant confidence, now seemed like a scream. She watched Richard disappear through the door, abandoning her to the fallout. A reporter, a young woman with a sharp expression, noticed her stillness and shoved a microphone in her face. "Isabella, you were laughing in court earlier. What are your thoughts on the verdict now?" The question was a shard of glass. Isabella flinched, her eyes wide and terrified, finding the reporters. The illusion of the untouchable socialite, the triumphant fiancé, was gone. In her eyes was the raw, primal fear of a person who had gambled everything on a man's power, only to watch that power be publicly dismantled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The perfectly glossed lips trembled. Without a word, she stumbled to her feet, pushing past the microphone with a clumsy, uncharacteristic lack of grace, and fled. Her exit was not that of a queen, but of a disgraced courtier. Amelia and Daniel finally made it into a private witness room, the sounds of the chaotic press conference fading behind the heavy door. Amelia sank into a chair, her body trembling. "Daniel, did that just happen?" "It happened. he said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. He looked almost as stunned as she did. Amelia, we didn't just win. We changed the entire game. He didn't just have to give you your share. The judge made him give you back your history. Tears began to stream down Amelia's face, but they weren't tears of sadness or even pure joy. They were tears of release, the release of years of being unseen, unheard, and undervalued. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, one she hadn't even realized she was carrying, finally being lifted. The weeks that followed were a disorienting blend of legal procedure and personal upheaval. The headlines were relentless. Financial news channels ran endless segments analyzing the future of Innovate Dynamics, now with a new, unexpected power player. Tabloids feasted on the human drama, publishing unflattering photos of Isabella leaving the mansion, with suitcases, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. As predicted, her relationship with Richard combusted on impact with reality. Their final argument, according to a leaked account from a household staff member, was volcanic. She had accused him of being a fool and a liar, not for the affair, but for getting caught for not having the foresight to bury his past more effectively. He in turn had venomously blamed her, snarling that her arrogant laugh in the courtroom had been the final nail in his coffin, turning a skeptical judge into a wrathful one. The gilded cage had been flung open, and its two occupants had turned on each other with savage fury before fleeing the wreckage. Amelia, meanwhile, tried to find her footing on this new, violently shifted ground. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt besieged. Bouquets from strangers arrived, along with letters from people detailing their own stories of being wronged, seeing her as a hero. Wealth managers whose names sounded like prestigious old firms called at all hours, speaking in a language of portfolios, trusts and tax shelters that felt utterly alien. She politely refused them all. One morning, staring at the provisional bank statement, Daniel had forwarded her a number with so many zeros, it looked like a typo. She felt a wave of nausea. This wealth was a consequence, not a prize. To treat it as a windfall would be to dishonor the pain it had sprung from. That was when the idea for the Serafina Foundation truly took shape. It became her anchor. She met not with wealth managers, but with the heads of non-profits and university endowments. She spent hours in Daniel's office, not discussing her own portfolio, but hammering out the charter for the foundation. It would fund scholarships for brilliant but under-resourced young women in technology and computational sciences. It would provide seed grants for female-led startups, so no woman would ever have to sign away her contributions or depend on a man's promise. Every clause she wrote, every mission statement she defined, was a way of healing herself, of turning the poison of her past into an antidote for others. The biggest question remained, what to do with her 40% stake in Innovate Dynamics. The offers to buy her out were staggering. She could take the money, billions of it, and vanish, live a life of quiet, anonymous luxury, and never think of Richard Hayes or that cold, sterile boardroom again. It was tempting. The thought of walking away, of being truly free from him and the company that had cost her so much, was a powerful lure. She spent a week wrestling with the decision. She walked through parks, visited museums, and sat in her old classroom at the middle school, remembering the joy of teaching history, of explaining how the past always shapes the present. And she realized that walking away would be an abdication. It would leave the company, her company, the one built on her grandmother's name, in the hands of the man who had tried to erase her. It would leave his version of its history, his culture, intact. Selling her shares would be a victory for her bank account, but a defeat for her legacy. She made her decision. She called Daniel. "I'm not selling," she said, her voice firm. "Book my seat for the next board meeting." The day of the board meeting, Amelia chose her outfit with the care of a general preparing for a strategic campaign. She didn't choose a power suit or flashy designer brands. She wore a simple, elegant dark teal dress, the only jewelry a silver pin in the shape of a feather, a gift from her grandmother Serafina. She carried a leather-bound portfolio, her presence radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence. When she walked into the Innovate Dynamics boardroom, a hush fell over the room. The long, polished table was lined with the faces of the company's most powerful figures. Men who a few months ago wouldn't have given her a second glance. Today they watched her every move with rapt attention. They saw not a poor wife, but their new principal shareholder. Richard was at the head of the table. He looked gaunt, aged. The charismatic swagger was gone, replaced by a brittle defensive posture. When his eyes met Amelia's, she felt no anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. She felt a profound and final disconnect, as if looking at a figure from a history book. She took a seat which was placed directly to the right of Richard's. The symbolism was lost on no one. The meeting began with awkward formalities. The CFO droned on about quarterly projections, carefully avoiding any mention of the stock's recent volatility. Finally, the chairman, a man named Gerald Vance, cleared his throat. "And now we'd like to formally welcome Ms. Amelia Hayes to the board. Ms. Hayes, perhaps you'd like to say a few words?" Amelia stood up. She didn't look at Richard. She addressed the entire board. "Thank you, Mr. Vance." She began, her voice calm and clear, filling the room. "Many of you know me only through recent headlines, but I have a much longer history with this company than you know. A history that began with an idea, an algorithm named Serafina." She saw a flicker of recognition in the eyes of the head of R&D. "I am not here to dwell on the past," she continued. "I am here to help shape the future. This company created a revolutionary technology. It has the power to do incredible things, but innovation without integrity is a hollow victory. My first motion as a board member will be to establish a new independent ethics committee to review our product development and data privacy policies. My second will be to allocate 1% of annual profits to the Serafina Foundation to create a pipeline of diverse new talent. We will not just be a successful company, we will be a good one." She sat down. The silence that followed was one of stunned respect. She hadn't come for revenge. She had come with a vision. After the meeting, as the board members filed out, offering her polite, almost reverent greetings, Richard remained in his chair. As Amelia went to leave, he finally spoke, his voice raspy. "Amelia." She stopped and turned, her expression neutral. "What you said in there." He started fumbling for words. You could have destroyed it all. Burned it to the ground." "That was never my goal, Richard," she said softly. "I didn't want to destroy what we built. I just wanted the truth of how it was built to be known." He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a universe of regret. "It was ours," he whispered, echoing the words from his old email. "It was always ours. I'm sorry." It was the apology she had once desperately craved. But hearing it now, it felt like a relic from a different lifetime, an artifact belonging to a woman she no longer was. "I know," she said. And with a final polite nod, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone at the head of the table in the empire they had built together, and which she now had the power to redefine. She walked out into the sunlight, not as Amelia Hayes, the wife, but as Amelia Hayes, the founder, her future, and her past finally her own. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that the truth has a weight and a value all its own. In a world that often celebrates loud, flashy success, it's the quiet, foundational contributions that are so easily overlooked and so profoundly important. Her journey from a heartbroken wife to a titan of industry wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. She didn't just fight for money. She fought for her history, for her name, and for the simple, undeniable fact that she was there. She was essential. The frozen smile on Isabella's face wasn't just about the loss of wealth, but the shattering of an illusion, the illusion that you can build a future on someone else's erased past. If Amelia's story of quiet resilience and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please let us know. Hit that like button to show your support and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story, where justice finds its voice in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for listening.